All right, let's jump right in. You know, for years, there's been this quiet but really intense battle brewing between the US and China. And it's not about what you might think. Not tariffs, not tech. It's about something way more fundamental to how global markets even work: financial trust. And now, well, the US just made a huge move. And it all kicks off with this number, $7.9 million. Now, you gotta understand, this is not just a fine. It's a warning shot, a shot across the bow. This is the total amount the U.S. just slapped on 3 Chinese audit firms. It's a landmark move, and it's basically screaming that a new era of accountability has begun. And if you had any doubt, just listen to the head of the U.S. audit watchdog, the PCAOB. The chair, Erica Williams, came out and said, and I'm quoting here, "The days of China-based firms evading accountability are over." I mean, you can't get much clearer than that, right? The message is simple. The rules have changed, and there are 0 exceptions. Doesn't matter where you're based. And here's what's so wild. This is a first. I mean, after years of this back and forth, these are some of the biggest penalties the PCAOB has ever handed out to any firm anywhere in the world. So that's the big question, right? What flipped the switch? How did we go from this decade-long stalemate to this sudden, intense crackdown? Well, the answer, believe it or not, comes down to one single piece of law. A law that totally changed the game and finally gave U.S. regulators the leverage they'd been missing for more than 10 years. It's called the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. You'll see it called the HFCAA. It was passed back in 2020, and its whole mission is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. It basically says, you want to raise cash from American investors on our stock exchanges? Fine. But your auditors have to open their books to our inspectors. End of story. This law was the key that finally unlocked a door that had been sealed shut. And this is where the law gets its real teeth. The HFCAA isn't some polite request. Nope, it's a demand, and it comes with a ticking clock. It gives the PCAOB full, unrestricted access to inspect. And here's the real kicker. If a country denies that access for 3 years in a row, boom. Companies from there can be completely banned, delisted from U.S. exchanges. And just like that, a 3-year countdown started for hundreds of Chinese companies. Okay, so to really get why this law was even necessary in the first place, we have to hit rewind a bit. This fight didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's a deep, fundamental clash, a clash of laws and national sovereignty that's been bubbling under the surface for a long, long time. So this is where you can see the 2 positions, and they're just fundamentally opposed. On the U.S. side, you have the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. You might remember this from after the whole Enron scandal. It requires the PCAOB to inspect the auditors for every company listed in the U.S., no exceptions. But then on the Chinese side, their law says, no way, foreign regulators can't just come in and conduct investigations on our soil. They argued that these audit papers could contain state secrets, and everything has to go through official government channels. For years, this was just a total impasse, a legal brick wall. And that impasse led to a really frustrating decade. They tried an agreement back in 2013, but it just didn't work. Then 2020 happened, and everything changed. Remember Luckin Coffee? That massive accounting fraud blew up, and it really hammered home the risk for American investors. That scandal was the political fuel Congress needed to finally pass the HFCAA. And suddenly, faced with a very real threat of getting kicked off U.S. markets, China came to the table. In 2022, they signed a new deal, finally giving the PCAOB the access it had been fighting for. Which brings us right back to the present. Now that the door for inspections is highly open, the PCAOB is wasting 0 time. They're making up for lost time, and they're showing everyone the real-world consequences for any firm that doesn't play by the new rules. And here are the first major results of those inspections. PwC's firms in China and Hong Kong got slapped with a combined $7 million fine. And get this, for widespread cheating on their own internal training tests. Unbelievable. Then you've got another firm, Shandong Howson, fined almost $1 million for actually faking an audit report. Now, just to put this in perspective for you, the biggest fine against the Chinese firm before this was only $50,000. So we're not talking about a small step up here. This is a quantum leap. But believe it or not, a huge fine isn't even the worst that can happen. For really serious violations, the PCAOB can hand down what is basically a professional death sentence. They can permanently revoke a firm's registration, which means you are banned forever from auditing any company on the US market. And guess what? We've already seen them use it. Let's go back to Luckin Coffee. So after that whole fraud implosion, they hired a new auditor out of Hong Kong, a firm called Centurion ZD. But when the PCAOB went in to inspect, they found that this new firm basically pretended that massive, well-known fraud never happened. They just ignored it in their audit work. The results? The ultimate penalty. The firm got its registration permanently revoked, and the owner was barred from the industry. The message could not be more clear. If you don't do your job right, the consequences are career-ending. So you see, these individual cases are really just the opening act. What they're doing is setting the stage for a much, much larger and higher stakes game that's going to shape the entire future of financial ties between the US and China. Because that clock we talked about, it's still ticking. We're talking about the fate of nearly 200 Chinese companies listed on U.S. stock exchanges. We're talking giants like Alibaba, JD.com. Their futures all hang in the balance here. And even though inspections have started, the PCAOB has been very clear. If China obstructs their access in any way at any time, they'll act immediately. That threat of being pushed off the delisting cliff is still very, very real. And you really have to zoom out here for a second. This is not happening in a vacuum. It's not just about accounting rules. From a geopolitical view, this whole audit fight is just one battlefield in a much wider strategic competition for economic and financial power between the US and China. So what's China's long-term strategy in all this? Well, their own strategic thinking seems to point to a few key moves. First, create something called an international board on one of their own stock exchanges to start attracting foreign companies, including American ones. Why? Well, that creates an equal playing field. China could then turn around and make the same audit demands on U.S. firms. Second, they're working to build up their own huge domestic audit firms to compete with the global Big Four. It's all part of a plan to reshape the financial world order to make it a bit more balanced from their perspective. And all of this leaves us with one final, absolutely critical question. We're really at a crossroads. For decades, globalization was all about financial markets coming closer together. But now, we're seeing this massive clash between a country's right to protect its sovereignty and control its own data, and a market's right to demand total transparency. So can these two powerful forces find a way to coexist? Or are we watching the very beginning of a great financial decoupling between the world's two biggest economies? The answer to that? Well, it's going to define the next chapter for the entire global economy.